Hello everyone, welcome back to the TJOmega channel for day 1552 of our daily content grind. I got done reading the new issue of the Skybound Transformer comics, and this is where I really hate having to talk about these two issues at a time, because it means I need to wait another month before we have enough to discuss, even though I do think a lot happened in this issue that I really want to talk about, and I hate it. We might do something with that later. Might have to pin that one for like a week from now after everyone's been given. You've had enough time to read it. Okay, spoilers abound now. But it did get me in the mood to talk about Seekers and the realization that we've come to a point in Transformers where it might be time for the Seekers to split for good. Like, the more I see what they have been doing with the individual Seeker characters, the more I find that they are far better apart than they are as a unit anymore. Now, for us classic Transformer fans, there's always going to be something special about seeing Skywarp, Thundercracker, and Starscream together. And that's never going to change, Your toy selection is just always going to be those three. If one comes out, the other two are most certainly going to come out along with them. And that's kind of what we've come to expect, and that's always a good thing for us collectors. But character-wise, it's just time. We can't really, it's been a long time really since we told stories of all three together. But like going back to original G1, you didn't get a whole lot, did you? Let's be honest here. In G1 fiction, comic book or cartoon, let's be real brutally honest here, they don't really stand out because they are just in Starscream's shadow, both because they share a design and because Starscream, story and character-wise, always just has the lion's share of what they get to do. Thundercracker and Skywarp are kind of rank and file in the original G1 cartoon. Thundercracker might be a little bit more stoic, and, Skywarp might be more mischievous and cruel. I mean, there is generally, if there is like a slightly evil cackle going on in a Decepticon scene, it's Skywarp. But that said, they drown under Starscream a lot. And really, he is the main example here, isn't he? Because he is the one they focus characterization on, he's the one that stands out and is most memorable. We see this happen with combiner characters too, like Brawl, Vortex, they don't really stand out compared to Swindle, do they? You could point me to stories where individual Combaticons are great. I liked the Vortex and Onslaught stuff, even though it was kind of toxic and manipulative. Brawl with his little umbrella drink is hilarious. And one of the few stories out of IDW 2.0 I really liked, which was Cosmos and Blastoff hitting it off. That was fun. But nothing compares to Swindle and the recognition he has because of, just story focus. And that's what happens with Starscream amongst the other Seekers as well. Even if you include all of the other potential Seekers out there, Starscream is just the character standout because he's written to be the most unique amongst them, and thus a lot more story focus on him. He overshadows any other Seeker that's in the series with him. Now, we don't need to search very far for stories of Starscream being on his own separate from the others. Because of his popularity, because he is one of the big four of the franchise, you have to include him in just about everything. Even fictions that do not have Autobots and Decepticons still include Starscream. Hello, Possession from Beast Wars. And then to strike it out on his own without the other Seekers around, yeah, he's flourished many times. The Armada one probably being the strongest example of what you can do with the character when he's just kind of off on his own and not part of like a singular group. If anything, having to watch over the other Seekers might have been keeping him down all this time. It might have been what kept him from like going all out on like a takeover of Megatron You know, there's actually like troops he might actually show some concern for. But that said, Starscream in a lot of fiction these days is essentially given stories where he finally gets his way. He's in charge in one way or another, whether that is a temporary leadership of the Decepticons, a splinter group like in the Skybound books that he's in control of, or, you know, which I guess is similar in Cyberworld. You know, he just has a lot going for him there. And I feel like Starscream's kind of proven that at this point in the character's existence, he does shine best when he actually is in control of something. Maybe not in control of all of the Decepticons, but for the most part, he really does have something more. He does really have something more to offer when he gets to tell these stories of actually obtaining, you know, the glory and power and whatever that he wants, and then not really doing what he needs to, or failing to do it as well as Megatron. Like, there's other things you can do. Frankly, if you want to give him like a traditional role of second in command, I don't think it should be Thundercracker and Skywarp he's in charge of. I think it should be these three. Now, admittedly, I could have also talked about the coneheads in the midst of all of this, but the truth to the coneheads is there is no fiction that's really fleshed them out properly. You know, it's Thrust, Ramjet, and Dirge. They exist to sell extra jet toys in Season 2, and that's pretty much it. They really don't have a lot of story role beyond that in any given fiction. Most of the time, they're just there to be familiar looking. You know, Skybound used them as just... Skybound straight up murked one of them. They murked Ramjet just for the sake of making their brand new character Shredhead look better. Things like that happened to the Coneheads. Coneheads in IDW weren't really given anything, you know? They ended up being like human-made clones. Okay, fine, I guess. So you might as well use them as like Starscream's backup. And while, yeah, that kind of puts them in the same shadow Skywarp and Thundercracker are, it's a place to start building something off of them. And I can just imagine Starscream learning what a dunce cap is on Earth, pointing to his minions and going, that's correct. That's absolutely correct. And obviously, we've seen more potential. Even beyond him being like an actual leader, actually in control of something, we have seen story potential in Starscream that no one has tapped yet. And even the people who brought up that new story potential did not tap it. Irony that. So, Starscream has plenty you can do. You know, the character's been around 40 years, but we've just recently proven that, yeah, like there are other ways you can tell a story. Thundercracker, we know. We love Thundercracker on this channel. He is absolutely a fan favorite these days, but not for anything the original one did. Thundercracker usually appears in the G1 cartoon when the Autobots need more things to shoot, when the jets are specifically the ones that are on the attack for Energon cubes, or when someone gets an animation error in there and accidentally colors Starscream blue. It's usually one of those things that puts Thundercracker on the screen. There's only one episode I can think of, I believe that's in the Plague of Insecticons, where it's specifically Thundercracker with Megatron and Soundwave instead of Starscream. You know, any other time than that, he lives in Starscream's shadow and doesn't really get to do a whole lot. And the truth is, because they only wanted one jet at a time, Thundercracker was just kind of relegated to, you know, background appearances, toy repaints just to keep a hold of the trademark, or little offbeat versions of himself, which granted were actually few and far between. Cybertron gave us a more amusing one with a southern accent for some reason. But he was just kind of like they were going for like a lovable loser angle with him in the Cybertron dub. Nothing that really came across like that for me in the Galaxy Force version. But they're trying, right? And the irony to this depiction is that he ends off the series being an Autobot. Like, he gets dragged back into the Decepticons, but yeah, he actually tries to help out, he tries to reform, and he's actually seems to be happy for the first time in the entire series. He seems to be happy once he has joined the Autobots. And ironic as it is, weird as it is, I love how they are balancing. I love how they like kind of like balance it out. And I love how it's weirdly predictive of how Thundercracker would turn out. Now, obviously, we have to go to IDW to really get the Thundercracker we know and love. Remember, the original intent behind Thundercracker's characterization was that he actually did not like the violence against humans. He thought it was beneath them. He thought it was unnecessary. So it put him at odds with the Decepticons, and he only stayed with them because of peer pressure and fear of Megatron. But once you get rid of those things, you don't have any reason for Thundercracker to remain a bad guy, you know? He actually doesn't want to hurt innocent life forms. He doesn't fully believe in the Decepticon cause. So, yeah, IDW was the first ones to actually take advantage of that original character intention that Bob Budiansky baked into him all the way back in 1984. And it was a great thing to see. And we love IDW Thundercracker with his pet dog Buster and his like favorite human weird girlfriend thing with Marissa. I don't know how to go over that correctly. But no, like Thundercracker very quickly became a fan favorite. And really kind of like cemented something that I said like I wanted an Autobot Seeker. Like how many Seekers are there, and all of them are Decepticons? Really? Because we have like 4 Datsuns in Transformers, and one of them is a Decepticon. Hi, Barricade. So yeah, it just kind of felt right, Like he's got the characterization for it. If any Decepticon was going to turn Autobot, it was going to be Thundercracker, or at the very least, it's nice to see one that actually wants to be a good guy. Thundercracker has no problem standing out on his own. I really do think this should just be his role from now on. Maybe not even starting with the Decepticons. Maybe he's reformed long before. Maybe he is maybe he tells the stories of being a former Decepticon while amongst the Autobots. There's stories now to be told of him choosing to move away from the Decepticons, trying to reform. And we've told that story in IDW. Skybound looks like they're setting up a similar story. And then there are things that we can move on from there and tell the stories of like a Thundercracker who joined up with the Autobots, before they ever left for Earth. And has been with them a long time now and is actually like well trusted, and there isn't any sign of like, oh, he's going to turn on us. He's going to be the mole. There's a story to be told there too, to start him off as an Autobot. Just because he's in that Seeker group, you think to yourself, of course he would start the story as a Decepticon. He's one of the Seekers. But what if he didn't? What if you put that characterization in right from the beginning and you just have him be with the Autobots? You could absolutely tell that story, and I would love to see that story told at some point. It gives you a different perspective when one of your like main Transformers on one side of the war actually used to be on the other. It would have been fun, and it's still possible, still there. But really, the whole thing is Skywarp and what you do with Skywarp. So Thundercracker got to be like a brand new character and a breakout amongst the fandom, specifically because they started working with what was his original design intention. But Skywarp really is just kind of cruel. He's kind of a bully. He laughs at others suffering, whether it's Decepticon or otherwise. And yeah, he's just kind of a rank and file thug. And that's pretty much the only thing he's ever gotten to be, aside from little bursts here and there of some story potential. we've seen him strike out on his own, but mostly because his color scheme is really cool. So a lot of jets over the years end up being Skywarp just because black and purple is the iconic Decepticon color scheme, and Skywarp is the one who bears it most often. So we have to use Skywarp in these scenes. We have to include him. We have to throw him in as a toy repaint, and then maybe he shows up in a comic book or something as said repaint. So tons of Skywarps, but very little character, very little depth, and we try. Twice now, Skywarp has appeared in an existing cartoon as a female, and again, doesn't get to do a whole lot. In Cyberverse, I don't know, he's lead fodder for a few scenes, and then just kind of vanishes from the show again. I should say she, because we are talking about the Cyberverse version. And then the Earthspark version is defined by her relation with Nova Storm, who, her acting like a sister unit. And you could pull something from that. Like if they really were depicted as sisters, and you could put them up against like Sunstreaker and Sideswipe, so the Decepticons have their siblings, that could actually be kind of cool. There's another little twist that you don't really get, any other time. You could work with that. But really, it's still, the issue here is he's still not striking out on his own. He is still defined by his relationship with other Seekers. And at first opportunity in Earthspark, he rejoins Starscream and they just fly off. So, yeah, even in that series, Skywarp does not get to go very far. And I keep in my head, I say like, oh, did you misgender them again? They're female. Yes, I know. I'm talking about multiple Skywarps, brain. It's getting muddled. I apologize. The only time he really struck out on his own was, again, in IDW 1.0. But he kind of followed a similar track to Thundercracker, where he started becoming a good guy and had his favorite human as a result. And that was more along the lines of like coercion. Like Skywarp did not want to join G.I. Joe, and even in this panel, he doesn't really look sold on being a real American hero. He just has a human he likes. That's basically what it boiled down to. I have to agree to work with G.I. Joe in order to get repaired, but I like this human, so I'm gonna be G.I. Joe for a hot minute. That's really all we got. So he doesn't get, the depth that Skywarp or Starscream does. And it's a shame. Like, I feel like he's due at this point, don't you? Like, doesn't Skywarp kind of due to have his breakout moment of like, this is who my character is. This is who I'm supposed to be. This is how we can grow and expand. And I haven't seen that out of Skywarp. And it's usually because when Skywarp is around, he's living in someone else's shadow, or he is a female who is stuck behind another female character, just for the sake of like having that duo act. But really, we've seen these really solid depictions, and there is part of me that is completely okay with the idea of fiction keeping the Seeker trio apart. Obviously not permanently, obviously not forever. At some point, the three would reunite. Call it just like the story called for all three to be Decepticon, or a story calls for all of them to unite, or whatever it is. But all of them have done so much different when you allow them to branch out. And I want to see that for Skywarp too. I wouldn't mind seeing it for the coneheads either. And we could go into like crazier ones like Slipstream and Sunstorm that are completely underutilized. But that would be a whole other video. For now, we're just going to talk about the fact that the Seekers really should just stay separate at this point. This goes all the way back to my old ideas of fixing the Seekers by giving them all unique alt modes. Keeping a similar silhouette in robot mode, but different alt modes to separate them apart so they can all stand on their own. And that's what I'm looking for. Seekers that can stand as characters on their own without depending on another Seeker or without living in one shadow. So that's what's floating around in my head right now. I know there's no definitive answer to it, but it's something to think about. So let me know in the comment section. Do you prefer your Seekers individual, or do you prefer the trio? And if you've got an idea for Skywarp, let me know. I'm curious for the input. So that is it for me today. Thank you very much for watching. I will see you next time.
Hello everyone, I am Astral Agent Magnetar, a Tokusatsu VTuber, and I am streaming 4 times a week over on Twitch, Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday afternoons, and a special late night one on late Friday/early Saturday. So come watch, come hang out, and let's make an impact together.